Whitaker stepped back, his grip hovering over his gun. "Turn around." Mia's jaw clenched. "For what?" The click of his radio. "Need backup at my location." Backup for what? It didn't matter that she was calm. It didn't matter that she'd done nothing wrong. Whitaker had already decided who she was, and yet Mia knew something he didn't. Back in the courtroom, the air was thick, the kind of charged silence before something shatters. Whitaker sat stiffly in the witness stand, his voice steady, his confidence unshaken. Not yet. At the defense table, Mia remained still, hands folded, gaze unwavering. No anger, no fear, just patience. Judge Leonard Reeves, a no-nonsense man in his 60s, adjusted his glasses, turning to Olivia. "Miss Grant, are you prepared for cross-examination?" Olivia's smile was subtle, sharp. "I am, Your Honor." Whitaker's hand rested in his lap, but behind his eyes, there was something else, something not quite right. A lie can hold power until the truth is played for everyone to see. And in this courtroom, Officer Whitaker is about to realize just how exposed he really is. He had been on the stand before, given testimony before. But this time, something was different. This time, the woman across from him wasn't just another defendant, and she wasn't just watching. She was waiting. 12 jurors, men and women from different walks of life, leaned in, absorbing every word of Whitaker's testimony. He spoke with confidence, as officers always did in cases like this. She was the defendant. He was the authority. That was how these things went. Except Olivia Grant wasn't acting like a defense attorney grasping at straws. She didn't scramble through notes, didn't search for the right words. She stood steady, patient, like someone who already knew exactly how this would end. She took a step closer. "Officer Whitaker," she said, her tone light, almost conversational. "Let's go over your testimony one more time." Whitaker gave a firm nod. "You stated that Miss Adams refused to comply when you pulled her over." "Yes." "That she resisted when you asked her to step out of the vehicle." "Correct." "And that for your own safety, you had to call for backup." He squared his shoulders. "Yes." Olivia paused just for a beat, then tilted her head slightly. "Are you absolutely sure?" A flicker of irritation crossed Whitaker's face, but he kept his voice steady. "Yes, ma'am. I wouldn't be saying it under oath if I wasn't sure." That was it. The moment. The ground had already shifted beneath him. He just didn't know it yet. The jury was listening. The entire courtroom was hanging onto every word. And Whitaker, clad in his uniform, confident in his authority, spoke like a man who had never been questioned before. He straightened, voice unwavering. "Mia Adams was erratic, aggressive. When I asked her to step out of the vehicle, she became hostile. I had to call for backup to de-escalate the situation." Olivia let his words settle before she spoke. With the kind of certainty that only comes from knowing you have the truth on your side, she folded her arms. "You feared for your safety?" Whitaker nodded. "That's correct." She raised a brow. Even though Miss Adams had both hands visible on the wheel, his lips parted, just for a second. Then he recovered. "She was making sudden movements." "Sudden movements," Olivia repeated, turning the words over, testing them. "And those movements justified your hand on your firearm." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "It's standard protocol." "Standard protocol," she echoed. "So you escalated the situation, called for backup, and then what happened next?" Whitaker exhaled sharply. "When backup arrived, we proceeded with detaining her. She resisted, making it difficult to place her in handcuffs. She refused to cooperate, forcing us to use reasonable force." A few jurors shifted in their seats. Olivia let the silence linger before speaking again. "You're telling this court, under oath, that Mia Adams was resisting?" "Yes." "That she fought back?" "Yes." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like permission to present new evidence." Judge Reeves gave a single nod. "Proceed." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly. The large screen behind the witness stand flickered on. Olivia walked to the table, pressed a button on her laptop, and then the footage played. The courtroom sat in utter silence as the footage played. Dash cam, body cam, two different angles capturing the exact moment Officer Whitaker had pulled Mia over. The jury leaned in, eyes locked on the screen. The video didn't show reckless driving. It didn't show hostility. Instead, it revealed a composed woman, simply asking why she had been stopped. It showed Whitaker cutting her off mid-sentence, his hand already hovering near his gun the moment she reached for her ID, exactly as he had instructed. The video displayed nothing but compliance. No sudden moves, no resistance, just the undeniable truth. For the first time, Whitaker shifted initially. A single testimony can turn the tide of justice, but when truth and power collide, who really wins? She didn't interrupt. She didn't object. She just watched, letting him weave his own noose. And the moment she finally spoke, the entire courtroom felt it. The realization that Officer Daniel Whitaker had just destroyed his own future. The room was packed, every seat filled, every gaze locked onto the man in the witness stand. His uniform was pristine, his badge gleaming under the harsh courtroom lights. He sat upright, radiating the confidence of someone who had always trusted the system to protect him. Across the room, Mia Adams remained motionless at the defense table. No fidgeting, no shifting, no sign of unease, just patient, unwavering silence. She listened. She observed. She waited. The judge, an older man with graying hair, cleared his throat. "Officer Whitaker, you may proceed." Whitaker adjusted his tie and leaned into the microphone. "On the night in question," he began, voice steady, "I initiated a routine traffic stop. The defendant was swerving between lanes, which raised suspicion of intoxication. When I approached, she was immediately aggressive, refusing to provide identification, raising her voice and escalating the situation. I feared for my safety." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Whitaker pressed on, unwavering. "Due to her behavior, I called for backup. She resisted my instructions to exit the vehicle, forcing me to restrain her to prevent further escalation." Mia blinked. Just once. At the prosecution table, the district attorney leaned back, arms folded, exuding confidence. To him, this case was already won. The jury had no reason to doubt a uniformed officer, and Whitaker had delivered his account with precision. But Mia's attorney, Olivia Grant, didn't flinch. She merely tapped her pen against her notepad, waiting. She already knew where this was headed. The judge turned to the defense table. "Miss Grant, do you wish to cross-examine?" A faint smile crossed Olivia's lips as she rose from her chair. "I do, Your Honor." She stepped toward the witness stand, flipping through her notes, though she hardly needed them. Her gaze met Whitaker's, steady and knowing. "Officer Whitaker," she said, voice even. A single lie can unravel an entire career. A single truth can bring it all crashing down. And Officer Whitaker is about to learn that the hard way. You're absolutely sure?" Olivia's voice was calm, almost curious. Officer Daniel Whitaker squared his shoulders. "I'm not in the habit of making things up, ma'am." Across the room, Mia Adams finally moved. Just a shift, one leg crossing over the other. Silent, watching. Olivia let the moment stretch, just long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then she smiled. "That's interesting," she said, stepping back toward her table, "because we have body cam footage that tells a very different story." Whitaker didn't know that yet. That night, everything had felt routine. The roads were quiet, the air thick with that late-night stillness that makes people let their guard down. Mia Adams was just another driver heading home, lost in thoughts of work and the relief of finally getting some rest. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving, just coasting through a well-lit stretch of Norfolk, Virginia, minutes from her apartment. Then the flash of red and blue lights. She sighed, gripping the wheel. She wasn't worried. She'd done nothing wrong, but she'd been in the military long enough to know that sometimes right and wrong didn't matter. Pulling over, she shifted into park, rolling down her window, both hands on the wheel, a habit, a necessary one. The officer approached, no greeting, no explanation, just a clipped license and registration. Mia glanced up, young, mid-30s, sharp jawline, the type who wore authority like a second skin. She nodded, keeping her voice even. "Sure. Can I ask why I was pulled over?" Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "Just hand over your license, ma'am." Something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. Moving slowly, deliberately, she reached for her wallet, pulling out her license and registration. She handed them over. Whitaker barely glanced at them. "Step out of the vehicle." Her brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said step out of the vehicle. No reason, no justification." She kept her voice level. "Is there an issue, officer?" You don't need to understand," he snapped. "Step out of the vehicle." A slow breath. In, outside. This wasn't new to her. She'd seen it before. A badge, a uniform, and a man looking for a reaction. She unbuckled her seatbelt, reaching for the door handle. "Hands where I can see them." Whitaker's hand flew to his holster. Mia froze, heart hammering. She wasn't moving fast. She wasn't reaching for anything. But in his eyes, she was already a threat. Her fingers curled into her palm. She fought the urge to react, to protest. Instead, she lifted her hands higher, such as his seat. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, but his jaw remained clenched, his face carefully controlled. The footage continued. It showed backup arriving, Mia stepping out of her vehicle with slow, deliberate movements, hands raised. Then, Whitaker's voice rang out clearly, "Turn around." "For what?" "Because I said so." The jury, which had been leaning forward moments ago, now slowly leaned back. And then, the most damning evidence played. The moment Whitaker had sworn under oath never happened. The moment Mia was slammed against the hood of her car. The moment her voice, still calm despite the pressure of his grip, stated clearly, "I'm not resisting." And yet, she was forced into handcuffs with no just cause. Silence blanketed the courtroom. Whitaker's face had paled. Olivia let the final moments of the footage linger before pausing the video. Then, with calculated precision, she turned to Whitaker. "You said she resisted," she stated, her voice steady and sharp. "Can you point out where that happened?" Whitaker's fingers twitched slightly. "The footage doesn't capture everything," he muttered. Olivia let that statement hang in the air. The weight of it, the absurdity of it, settled over the room. Then she took a slow step forward. "Would you like to revise your testimony?" Whitaker's breathing grew shallow. Across from him, Mia hadn't moved. She didn't need to. She already knew how this was going to end. And now, Whitaker was about to realize exactly who he had lied about. Whitaker tried to regain control, his frustration seeping into his voice. Situations like this happen fast, he argued. Officers don't always remember things exactly as they happened. We have to make split-second decisions. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Full context, she repeated, tasting the words as if testing their weight. Then, after a brief pause, she began pacing slowly. So let me get this straight, she said, her tone measured. You, a trained law enforcement officer, somehow misremembered every key detail of that stop. Whitaker's jaw tightened. The reason for the stop? Olivia continued. Misremembered. Silence. The aggression? She pressed, tilting her head. Misremembered. Whitaker's nostrils flared. The resistance? She let the final word hang in the air. Misremembered. Whitaker's grip on the witness stand was white-knuckled now. You see, Officer Whitaker, Olivia said, her voice cool, deliberate. You might convince some people with words like misremembered and split-second decisions. But this, she gestured toward the screen, this isn't about memory. This is about evidence, and evidence doesn't lie. A few jury members nodded, others remained still, their expressions unreadable. But one thing was certain. The man in the witness stand was no longer the confident officer they had seen earlier. He was exposed. Then Olivia smiled. Just a little. Now, she said, tapping a finger on her notepad, let's talk about who exactly you decided to lie about. Whitaker inhaled sharply. Across the room, Mia finally looked up, and when her gaze locked onto his, it wasn't filled with anger or hatred. It was something far more powerful. And in that instant, Whitaker realized he had picked the wrong person to lie about. The shift in the courtroom was unmistakable. Minutes ago, Whitaker had been the one in control, his testimony steady, unwavering. Now, he was nothing more than a man caught in his own lie. The judge sighed, turning toward Olivia. Miss Grant, do you have any further questions for the witness? Olivia barely glanced at Whitaker. No, Your Honor. With that, she turned back toward the defense table. Her movements were quiet, precise. Then, resting her hands gently on the back of Mia's chair, she leaned down slightly. Are you ready? She asked softly. Mia didn't answer right away. Instead, she pushed back her chair and stood. Her movements slow, deliberate. Her confidence wasn't loud, wasn't performative. It was something deeper, unshakable. She walked toward the witness stand, her posture flawless, her expression unreadable. As she took her seat, the judge looked at her. State your name for the record. Mia took a slow breath before speaking. Lieutenant Commander Mia Adams, United States Navy SEAL. The air in the courtroom shifted. The jury blinked. The district attorney stiffened, and Whitaker, his entire body tensed, because in that moment, the truth crashed over the room like a tidal wave. Mia wasn't just some civilian. She was a high-ranking officer, a woman trained in tactical warfare, survival, and high-pressure decision-making. A woman who had faced danger in ways Whitaker couldn't even begin to comprehend. And he had lied about her. Mia adjusted the microphone slightly, her fingers barely brushing the stand. Then she turned to Whitaker, her voice steady, controlled, sharp enough to cut through steel. I have spent my entire career making split-second decisions, she said, each word precise, deliberate. Not in a courtroom, not on the side of a highway, but in actual combat zones where lives are on the line. The difference between life and death isn't a feeling, it's facts. Whitaker's face turned pale. Mia didn't blink, didn't waver. She held his gaze, unflinching. When I was pulled over that night, I wasn't intoxicated. I wasn't aggressive. I wasn't a threat. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. But Officer Whitaker didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a narrative. The jury was riveted, hanging on to every word. Mia turned, letting her eyes sweep the courtroom. I have served my country for years. I have taken oaths. I have followed rules. I have operated with honor. She let the words settle. Then, after a brief pause, she continued. But what happened to me that night? Her lips pressed together. That wasn't about honor. She turned back to Whitaker, locking onto him with a stare that could cut through steel, a predator cornering its prey. I know what real fear looks like, Officer Whitaker. Her voice dipped slightly, controlled and deliberate. I've seen it in combat. I've seen it on the faces of men who knew they were about to lose everything. Whitaker swallowed hard. She leaned in, just a fraction. And right now, you look just like them. The room held its breath. For the first time since the trial began, Whitaker had no words, no excuses, no defense. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Whitaker sat frozen. The jury no longer saw a trusted officer. They saw a liar, a man who had abused his power and had finally been caught. The judge exhaled sharply, his patience frayed. Officer Whitaker, given the evidence presented and your sworn testimony, I have no choice but to refer your statements for perjury review. Whitaker flinched. The confidence he once had was gone. His world was crumbling in real time. At the prosecution's table, the once smug district attorney avoided looking at him. The jury members were stone-faced. And Mia? She just sat there, unshaken. The judge turned to Olivia. Miss Grant, do you have any closing remarks before we proceed? Olivia stood, buttoning her blazer. Just one, Your Honor. She turned toward the jury, hands clasped in front of her. This isn't just about one officer making a mistake, she said, her voice clear and steady. This is about what happens when power is abused, when a trusted individual fabricates the truth, expecting no one to challenge them. She gestured toward the screen, still frozen on the damning footage. If Mia Adams weren't who she is, if there were no video, if she had reacted even slightly differently that night, what do you think would have happened? The jury exchanged glances. They didn't need to answer. They already knew. Mia leaned back, arms crossed. She didn't have to say anything. The truth was already deafening. The judge straightened his glasses. We will adjourn and reconvene for final deliberations. Whitaker didn't move. He was still processing what had just happened. Mia, however, did. She turned to him one last time. You pulled me over that night thinking you had power over me. Her voice remained quiet, controlled. But power isn't about a uniform. It isn't about a badge. It's about truth. She let those words hang in the air just a moment longer than necessary. Then, with the same quiet composure she had maintained from the beginning, she stood and walked away. Whitaker didn't, because for the first time in his life, he was the one trapped, and no one was coming to save him. But this isn't just about Mia Adams. This is about every person who has ever been silenced by the system. Every person falsely accused who didn't have the proof to fight back. This is why accountability matters. Too often, people in power believe they can lie without consequence until they meet someone who refuses to stay silent. So ask yourself, how many others like Mia are out there? How many times has this happened when there wasn't a camera rolling? And most importantly, what are we going to do about it? If you believe in accountability, in truth, in justice, share this story. Speak up when you see injustice, because silence, that's exactly what they're counting on. Now tell me, What would you have done if this happened to you?